Hey everybody, welcome to DBS Films Podcast. My name is Kellen. With me as always is my brother Brennan. Together we make movies with DBS Films. Today's episode, we're going into part two of a scene-by-scene breakdown of Horror in the Forest, our newest feature film, which is out now on Amazon Prime. I'm going to go ahead and do us a massive favor. You can go ahead and watch it for yourself. Leave us a review. Allows us to continue to make movies for our fans and with our fans. So let's hop right into it. Now, as we mentioned, we're off to a really, really good start. And I think we continue to cook from here, honestly. One thing I really, really enjoyed about this movie is, again, we always say pacing is critical. So we hop right in from them being scared with a shotgun right to the face. They cut back to an Airbnb and their door is open. They slowly walk through. They're looking for something, looking for something. Nothing's here. And a glass bulb falls off. It shatters. And who is it? It's Joe. And we love Joe. And he goes and he basically ends up taking care of the lights. There's a little accident there that he had, and that's why the power was out. So we explained that passive pop scare. But again, I think it goes back to what I was saying with the passive pop scares is you basically need to have a reason for them to be scared, to increase the pacing, things like that. But at the end of it, everyone's like, oh, okay, this is fine. So I would say it's a little bit more aggressive with a shotgun to your face. But I think, we learned from the Haunting of the Murder House that glass pop scares really get people going. It's a loud noise. It does it. And I really like this scene because I think it was something that, again, it's a tool in our tool shed. And we're just like, you know what? We're going to go ahead and bust this one out again and use it. And I think it introduces Joe really easily as well, too. Plus, it keeps you on your toes. You show back up, the door's open. They're already a little bit worried. So I'm curious what you think about our next fun little passive pop scare.
Yeah, I mean, the objectives of this scene, number one, is to get you to meet Joe and to get you to meet Joe in a way that, is more thrilling, it's more engaging. The other thing is to show that they actually have a location that is not in the woods because we have multiple scenes with them, in this Airbnb house of theirs that's outside the woods. I think you kind of see the limitations of indie filmmaking where if I had the option, I would have them in a cabin or something that looked closer to something that was not a really nice Airbnb. But obviously, with our budget, I don't have the ability to, location scout and get the best deals. We had a location that was available to use and we used it. So I do think there's a little bit of production in there that could be amped up here. We could have a cabin, the doors open. It'd be a little bit creepier, especially since that there's, some crazy people out there with shotguns. But I think this scene gets its job done. I don't like it. I think that we can be a little bit more clever. This kind of just feels like we're taking something that worked and using it again, which is fine. I mean, it's this is better than having nothing here and just having Joe be there and introducing him. I think this is a more clever way to, keep the viewer engaged. The cuts are good. You know who Joe is. They have some dialogue about him. So I don't think it's the worst thing. But I do think we could be more clever. I think there's a better way to do this scene. I still think you need a pop scare here, but I think the light scare is not for this movie. I think at this point, the reaction from me, if I was watching this movie, is all right. Like they're using pop scares. This one feels cheap. The shotgun didn't feel cheap. This one did. So I think we could be a little bit more clever. That being said, if we had a spookier cabin, if they come back from the woods, I do think it might work a little bit better. But once again, this is not the worst thing in the world. The worst thing in the world would have been just having Joe out there by their truck and they pull up saying, "Hey, I'm Joe." Pretty much what we did with the original Into the Forest. I think he just met the landlord guy. So, I think it could be done better. It could be written better. It could be, we just put a little bit more brain power into it. But that being said, on the indie level, this scene's fine. It gets a reaction. People liked it. People get scared. I think it was probably our worst glass pop scare thing, but it still works. So, you can be good, you can be bad, but don't be boring. I think that this one is filed under it's not boring.
Bad but not boring. We'll take that one. I do agree, and I figured you were going to kind of mention something like that because I know when we were planning this one and like walking through it and like throwing the wallet down just to understand where it was going, it definitely is a bit of a reach. You know what I mean? Like, I think the goat would be, you have like a chandelier or something fall from high that we've kind of did before, but we didn't really have it. And like the reason why it works so well in Haunting the Murder House is because it fits. You see it in the ceiling fan, and then it drops, and then we explain why that happened. I think the Murder House one is definitely much better because it comes out of nowhere and you see it. To me, I think this is more that we know that glass is like that is a good audio scare that ends up pushing people. But I do want to kind of mention or dig into what you were saying there, why it's critical we have a pop scare here, because we have after this, we have the gang ends up having a little time with one another and talking about what's going on. And then we have the interview with Joe. So that means there's a 10-minute period of downbeat progression. So we needed to stack the scares there. And as you mentioned, if you don't have a scare or something that hits, then it becomes boring. You now get an additional, minute or so of Joe just introducing himself. And I mean, I will say Joe kind of has, of anyone in the DBS history, Joe kind of has a history of lackluster pop scare intros. If you look back to The Girl in Cabin 13, if you look back to kind of what we did here, but I think, if we did want to fix this, I think to me, it would be, I would still want to do the glass. Like you said, I think it's like the cabin. I think it would be them hearing something going out in the cabin, almost more like the scare that they see when they see Jesse in the first Into the Forest. The cousin, I think that was his name that we had for him, but when he was a drunk cousin, I think you would do that, but then you'd have bottles or something that would then scare and turn, and then you reveal Joe. But again, our confines of it were there. So I think the core of this one is glass is spooky. I think is kind of, what I'm curious about. If you think that using these auditory scares is a great way. Because again, to me, you have the shotgun scare and the yelling, which is fearful as a gun. And the next one is anytime there is a natural reaction of if you hear glass shattering, that just catches people's attention.
Yeah, glass, it's just unexpected noises. Anything that you can do that's unexpected will get people to jump. But yeah, I do think there needs to be something here because now the next scene is just heavy character development, and we have to introduce the characters. You have to kind of get and understand the relationship. We even lengthen this scene. So we did need to make sure that we had something here, and we got it. Am I happy with it? It's all right. I think for the next one we'll do better.
Sounds like a plan. And let's hop right into that character development scene. So we have the gang sitting around, having beers, having a good time, talking. And then, as you mentioned, we did have the addition of Andrew's dialogue with Georgie and Alexa, and basically fleshing out that character a little bit more, which I do believe adds a lot of depth to Bo as a character, because again, a lot of the times I think main characters are the most boring characters in horror movies because they essentially are the vehicle for the audience. So I think having this really does set that up. It does set up the relationship there. And it was something we were worried about going into kind of the just the screening of everything, because like you said, we had not originally anticipated these scenes being so long because we're always worried about pacing. But I think they really paid off well. I think they were really good. I think, again, the only thing I would probably change here would be production value of the location. And I mean, you slap that campfire on there, you got yourself the lighting that you want. But other than that, I think this is your textbook solid character development story here.
Yeah, I mean, the goal of this was to show everyone's relationship. The scene right after this where they talk about Joe scaring them, I think was improv because we edited the movie and we said, hey, look, like we need to explain who this Joe character was because he just kind of runs and turns off the power. So, props on Andrew and Alexa basically improving that little scene where they're, going over their checklist. The outside patio scene was to give Dylan some outside time to show that, they are on a friendlier basis. And then, props to Andrew and Alexa for essentially writing that one little scene, which I think is important because it gives Bo throughout the movie wants to leave. He's always like, I want to get out of here. I want to get out of here. I want to get out of here. And if we didn't have this scene, I don't think it's just like, why doesn't he just leave? Just leave. Like, it would have left a big question mark. Is like, this guy keeps saying he's leaving, but he's not. Why is that? Well, it shows that, he really does care for, Georgie. He wants more from the relationship. He wants, he has feelings for her. And I think it does, impact the movie later on. So I think it's, a scene that was deserved. I think it was a good scene. I think a lot of people liked it. We did, because it lengthened the character development stuff. I was a little uneasy about it because I was like, man, we don't really want to have this long dialogue thing. But we got feedback from other people. I got feedback from Discord, and the unanimous reason was, hey, keep this scene. I like it. It adds character depth. And it's props to them, because going into it, I said, we need a scene like we had in the original Into the Forest, where Jimmy and I think Kim, I can't remember what the actress's name was actually in that one. I know the actress was Kim. They get stuck in the well, and there's like that cool outside scene, and it's just really kind of weird. The dialogue was weird. Everything about that scene was really weird, but the context of the scene of them having, retelling a story was important. I think Alexa and Andrew did a really, really good job of taking that, not making it weird, and giving it just more life. And I think it was a very important scene for this movie that paid dividends later on. You may not see the reason for it right away, and you might be like, what is going on here? But later on, you're like, I see. Like, it gives their character more commitment to each other.
Yeah, I would say I'm very curious again as the reviews start coming in, how people highlight that. Because, I'll be the first one to say it. You get a main character, cast role, it's tough. You're basically like flack for kind of, the details or things that end up happening here. And, to see how that additional lines and dialogue and story ended up, changing potentially people's thoughts of, what they like when it comes to the relationship they have here, I think is going to be very interesting. So we move from that, we go to and this is a really cool one to me, and I think you're going to start seeing these scattered all around DBS, is the Joe scene that is exactly the same as essentially the Into the Forest scene that we first had out there. Slight differences, when it comes to shaping the dialogue and things like that. But basically, Joe sits down and he extends the plot as someone who, is really an expert in the area, to say. I think what's really cool is you see what works and what doesn't work. And I also think the most unique thing with this is like, I think if you look at the original Into the Forest, it's a lot of things that don't necessarily work with little outlines of what does work. And I think this plot development scene works, and that's why you're going to see it again there. But I think it's really interesting to me, does its purpose. Is there a better way you can do this besides like some other production value? I honestly don't know, because I think the background looks fantastic and everything. So like, I think what is interesting here is seeing our progression from these movies. And I think redoing these scenes and seeing a scene like this specifically is really, really cool. Cause like, I would just love for anyone to go watch Into the Forest and watch the scene, and then go watch Horror in the Forest and watch the scene. And you'll be like, damn, like it's really cool seeing the progression there. That's really the main thing I wanted to highlight on that. I think this is just your generic downbeat. Like, this is, of all the generic downbeats, this might be one of the, I mean, even them sitting in front of the forest is really generic, but these are the downbeats that make your story flow. And I think what's cool to see is, again, us having take two of this.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, taking what worked with the Into the Forest scene and redoing it and just giving it more punch. I think that this scene's perfect. It shows, the grief. Like, this whole story at its heart is a story of grief and loss, and how people deal with that grief and loss. And I think, him coming from a outside perspective, explaining why he quit, why there's too much stress, why it really bothered him, is really kind of cool. It kind of builds the world. You're showing outside people's perspective. I think it runs a little bit long. We kind of, take a while to get to the real punch of, this kind of movie. That would be my only criticism. I think we could tighten up the dialogue and make it go a little bit quicker. And I do think that if you had a parent here, I think it would be better, off the top of my head, just thinking about it now, I think we would have moved up the Meredith scare to where the light bulb falls and then have the interview with her the next day. And she could have really been like, my child got taken. This is what happened. And then you can move Nelson up even quicker, would probably be the way that I would do the Into the Forest 3.0. But this is a good scene. It's a good, once again, it's a good transition scene as well, because he gets up, gives them a tour, and now we're in the next scene flawlessly. And if there's one thing I'm really happy about with this movie is how we enter scenes, how we exit scenes, and we flow all the way through this movie. It's very seamless, and it took us a while to get here, but it's really, really cool. It's a good feeling, and I think we took what we learned here and even applied it to Bigfoot and made it even better.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Again, it's kind of cool seeing the base build, and I think that's something that I really see with the Bigfoot project is kind of the big difference is how smoothly these scenes are like interchanging and moving. But with that being said, we get our next scene. Joe brings us in the woods. He's walking around there. He's basically like, "This is too spooky. We can't go further than this." I think it's a good scene in the sense of moving it along, but this is probably if I had to pick a scene of like we could do something more spicier here, like either some type of almost like a scarier marker that's like don't go past here or something like that, or like I just feel like there could be a lot more to this scene. But again, I think the highlight of the scene is you go from Joe warning them to Joe bringing them out there, to then Joe basically being like, you don't go past this, and then obviously they go past it. So it gets the job done, but I would say, if we're looking at how do we make the best movie frame by frame, this would be probably the one scene that I would really sit down with, kind of like what you mentioned, either make it apparent, make it something. I think this is kind of one that could just use a little bit more love and attention when it comes to increasing it. But I mean, again, it's not bad. Like that's the cool thing. Like in these past scene by scene breakdowns, I've usually been like, oh, here comes this scene that's like no good. But it's a very solid scene. I just think of all the scenes, this might be one that might use a little bit more of the improvement. And I don't even think it's anything with like what we could have done. I think it's more of a structure work in the actual script and plot for kind of getting them out there.
Yeah, I would have just taken some of that interview that he did and then had him going out there and delivering that outside in the woods a little bit more, and then had like a little mini journey out in the woods of like, all right, this is where I used to go, this is what I used to do, this is where it is. And he's like, all right, I don't go past this point. I do agree with you. I think that I don't go past this point's a good plot line. It's like really kind of raising the stakes, and I think we should just give it a little bit more, because you can see like in my head, I don't think it turned out as cool, or I think it turned out cool, but now there's an opportunity to make it even cooler. And I don't think I had that before, where I was like, all right, this is just to, highlight the dangers that they're going to, but I think you can really kind of spice this stuff up. Not really sure how. I have to, work on the script, but we want to make it very clear you don't go past this point. And I think that that should be the whole sole reason of this thing. Don't go past the point. But it's there, and there's like, once again, you're kind of uncovering these little nuggets, and for the next movie, we'll flush them out. I'm always looking at, all right, like what can we develop a little bit better? I do think that this is a scene that we can do a little bit better and just make it shine a little bit more, give it a little bit more attention and give it more polish. And I think that raises the stakes a little bit more, which will make the next pop scare that much better.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And again, I think this one's more of a structure one. Like the plot there of like we don't go past here or we don't go here is very solid. You just got to figure out the right way to execute on it. So that being said, we are going to hop into our last scene of this episode, which is our Meredith pop scare. And I will say, I think this is great, man. I think this is using the lore of the parents going out there being distressed. You're walking out there. There's a good little back and forth between Andrew and Dylan when it comes to just kind of their relationship of being out there. It's a little spooky, and then you get a classic pop scare. And again, I think with the pop scares is like this again is another passive pop scare. This is a pop scare that happens, but it is not enough to make people be like, oh my god, like this is a witch or anything like that. It's not that intense one, but It is chaotic. It is crazy. You're not quite sure what happens. But what's great with it is it's so easily explained right away and it fits. Where the light bulb crashing doesn't necessarily fit. That's kind of cheap. This to me is the definition of a great passive pop scare that makes sense when it comes to what basically is happening in the movie and you execute on it. So I like this scene a lot. And huge shout out to Meredith. She did a fantastic job and just being an absolutely crazy, distraught parent, which, hey, your kid gone missing and you keep hearing them. What are you going to do? You're going to do exactly what she did. So I like this scene a lot. I think this kind of, the past scenes were setting it up or whatnot, but I think we snap right back into really good pacing with this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is the difference. And what I'm learning is like the difference between pop scares that work and cheap pop scares. The cheap pop scares just happen because they happen, like they just have to happen. And this is a good pop scare because it introduces the Meredith character, it pushes the plot forward, it shows the grief and loss, which is the whole theme of the movie. And then what does it easily do? It brings Reynolds into the movie flawlessly. You don't have to think about it. All of a sudden, this dude's here, and this is a rabbit hole that we could follow. You're following the breadcrumbs, you're chasing the rabbit, and it's seamless. She did a great job. Very distraught. Reynolds comes in there. Great scene. I think the pop scare was actually pretty good. Once again, my biggest problem, this should have been a oneer. It wasn't a oneer. There's too many chomps. There's too much moving around. You lose your immersion. I remember having a lot of issues with the flashlights at the time. It was very difficult to get her to stay behind the tree and like make it so that I could kind of hide that pop scare. That was an issue. So there was cuts there. That little forest area that we were in was not the best spot to do this. So there's a reasons that we had all these cuts going. But I think next time, really do it as a oneer, and you can get a much better, more immersive pop in there. And I honestly think the one we just did, the pickup we did with the Roger Project, is probably how I would do this one. Again, I think that one turned out really well. But once again, that just shows our growth, understanding how to do these things, learning from this. But the biggest thing, once again, with this one that I have is just there's too many cuts. We had to do ADR, all this stuff. While it's fine, pulls you a little bit out of the moment, which just, kind of sucks. That being said, people love this pop scare, audio pop scare, person pop scare. I would have panned and whipped the camera a little bit more so I don't have to use those stupid VHS glitch graphics. But, next time we'll do better.
I like the glitch graphics. I think they're cool. That being said, I definitely agree and I can see that. So really, where this leaves us is, again, just a very smooth escalation of the plot. And it allows for, just again, the viewer to have multiple instances of pacing when it comes to these passive pop scares. Nothing too crazy so that the viewer would be like, you guys got to get out of here. Why are you still in that cabin? There's a shapeshifter, whatever we face when it comes to the last movies that we were making where people would think, hey, it's escalated too quickly. I think it's a very smooth escalation for it. But as you mentioned, that introduces our Officer Reynolds character. Huge shout out to Brent, again, a legend with DBS in the sense of working with us on a lot of different movies that we have here. But as you mentioned, it's very smooth bringing him in here. And what I enjoy with this is you have Brent again is going to, develop the plot and push it. But I think what's really interesting here is you're starting to see in our movies, like they're hitting very logical points. And I think these are points that really just did not exist from Into the Forest, the first one. They just kind of, things would happen. They had the interview with Nelson, they went out there themselves, where they are actively hitting off checkpoints. And really, Officer Reynolds is a very, very critical checkpoint for explaining kind of the difference there. And I think Brent did a great job. One, kind of coming in and explaining, but then also just setting up in that little car scene of them, of basically, you're not the first people out here. This is going to happen all the time. I'm here to protect, in the sense of like, there's a lot of people having this. I think it really sets the stage for Nelson very well, because you essentially have the character of Officer Reynolds kind of, I would say he is the anchor pulling them away from any kind of concept that a witch is doing it. You know what I mean? He's really kind of that normalized person in there. And I just think, again, the way that we introduced him and the way that we have him was very smooth. And this is, again, before his interview and everything, this is just him showing up. But what are kind of your thoughts of how we had this character placed? Because I think that was really important here. I think having the character of Reynolds. And I mean, realistically, in my opinion, if we lean heavy into Casey, or into Nelson, besides the fact of having them out there earlier, I really do think you would get a lot more of Reynolds giving a backstory on kind of the parent side of things of grief and loss, countering the paranormal beliefs of Nelson. So I think again Brent did a fantastic job here, but I really did I think of all the character introductions that we've had, like you were saying, this is probably one of the smoothest, and I think he plays a very important role in providing that little stability and questioning of the plot. And again, for Horror in the Forest, if there's anything that I think I've seen from watching it now, I just think we to me, it wouldn't be the Rudwick Forest, it would be the case of Casey Morgan, would almost be kind of the lean into it. And I think again, you see that, which is how well Officer Reynolds plays in this.
Yeah, I mean, the goal for this movie is to bring in someone who is very logic based, which is Reynolds. And you want to show that he and the police team did as much as they can. You want to highlight the mystery element, why they can't figure these people out. But you really want to show that, he's a broken character, that he just couldn't take it anymore. He tried his best. And honestly, shout out to Brent, man. He came in here. That is like a 5-minute monologue. He did a lot of pre-production work on this stuff. And I think he gave me a usable take with every single one of these. There was no cutback points. And, it was the performance that he gave was incredible. I remember doing the first one because I've worked with Brent before, but he's always played a masked man or, a pretty basic intro cop. For him to come out there and give that performance, I think everybody in that room was like, damn, man, that was like pretty good. And he just did a great job and continued to do it over and over and over again. And gave me a lot of cool takes that I could use with different variations of each one. He wrote some of his stuff to make it a little bit longer. And I think those are the ones that we actually used, the ones that he, himself kind of wrote. And he did a fantastic job. I couldn't ask more from an actor, and it really shows his growth, his comfort behind the camera. And it's one of the things that I'm proud of. And it's really cool for me to see the growth of our actors that work with us consistently. They're able to get more experience behind the camera, and that experience translates to giving better performances. And it just shows you that, acting is a talent. It's a skill that as long as you work on it more, you're going to get better. And I think Brent is a shining example of that. That being said, I think if we're going to go the Casey Morgan route, I think that Reynolds needs to be the chief lead investigator on this case to really kind of highlight and dig deeper. Right now, he's a broad stroke kind of guy. He worked on these cases. He worked, with multiple parents, but I think this needs to be the lead investigator, and we can have him be the same character. This case broke him, but he really needs to highlight the dangers in Nelson, because that raises the stakes for our next scene, which is with Nelson, essentially. I do think that this one, once again, ran a little bit too long. I think we could have kind of chopped it down a little bit, because I think there's two big issues I have with this movie. And the first one is coming up now, is you have a very long Reynolds scene, which is a one-sided dialogue scene. And then a couple minutes later, we do have a pop scare in there, but a couple minutes later, you have a very long Nelson scene. And they're both integral to the plot that we developed for this movie, but I think we could shorten them, do them in more clever ways, have them in different areas or break them down. Because I think if we're ever going to lose a viewer, it's in the next probably 10 minutes, because out of the 10 minutes, 8 minutes are sit down, standalone dialogue interviews. And I think it kind of really slowed the pace down a lot. That being said, in order to build this story, they're necessary. But I think that would be one of my two complaints with this movie, was the pacing really, really slows down to almost a mockumentary level at this point. And I think that we started off so strong and so fast that the viewers are expecting this pace to continue, and we really do kind of lag here. And second, don't shoot him against a wall. I scoured all the locations to trying to find a better place. We couldn't do it. I honestly don't think it's that bad. We did kind of get lucky with how it kind of turned out, But man, like I really wish he was in this really cool cabin with a lot of depth, and we could have really done him justice. So sorry, Brent, but like the locations that we had access to did not look suitable at all for that. And then we tried to even put like a painting next to him, and I remember all the paintings were just really, really weird and just would have been distracting. So we went with the gray wall. I don't think it's the worst thing ever, but man, like the cinematographer and me, I remember shooting that and I was like, oh man, this reminds me of the Morgan estate when we were shooting against these blank walls. So I think next time, just better location, a couple tweaks. But once again, man, Brent did such a great job with this, really developed that character. And I couldn't ask for more from an actor.
Yeah, I mean, Brent, again, legend for that. Sorry we put you up against a blank wall. Thank God for keyframe zooming, because that helped us save it a lot. But really, really good stuff. So I was going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. Again, be sure to take a look at Horror in the Forest online. You watch it, rent it, review it. It means the world to us. And we'd love to know what your feedback is, because again, we make movies for our fans, with our fans. But until then, have a good one, my friends.